Hi, I'm Gary Hoberman. Welcome to another episode of Unqork'd Unscripted. This time, I've got someone who I first met as a client when he was CEO at Cognizant, and I was one of, I think, a top five account at that point as a CIO, and we've been friends ever since. I'm so honored to have Frank D'Souza here with us today. And Frank, thank you for joining us. You know, your journey for those who haven't met Frank, like your reputation for creating and co-founding, being the CEO of Cognizant with hundreds of thousands of employees, billions of revenue, and like top place to work is incredible. So just thank you for joining us first, Frank, and welcome.
Gary, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah,
Looking forward to
and
it.
for those who don't know, also Frank is outside of that. You know, you've helped create an amazing fund, Recognize, and focusing in services area. You on the board of MongoDB, one of my favorite companies, among many other companies' boards. Been on the board of GE, on the trustee of Carnegie Mellon. Like it's insane, and you also come from, you know, a background where your father was like one of the top, you know, helping build India at a point in time and nation. So, you know, there's so much to unpack here. And again, like just if you could, Frank, give us start from the beginning. Like you went to Carnegie Mellon and that's where you're a trustee. How did you get excited about technology and where did you grow up? And I know University of Macau, is it? And so I'd love share your story, please, would be great to hear.
Yeah, Gary, I'll try to keep it short. It has to start with my parents, my dad in particular, who, as you said, was a diplomat for the Indian government. And so I was born into this family that traveled around the world every 3 years in a different country. So I was born in Africa. We spent a lot of my early life in Africa. And then, but every 3 years in a new country, and periodically going back to India when my dad would have a posting back at the central government in India, in New Delhi. When I was a teenager, my dad was posted to New York City. He was India's consul general here in New York, where I'm based now. And my dad was a voracious reader. He would read everything he could get his hands on. And I remember one day he came to me and he said, "Frank, I'm reading in the newspaper about this new gadget called the personal computer. I can't really understand what it's all about, but it's something that I think you need to understand better." And he was the one who sort of first kind of piqued my interest in computing. And so it turned out that my school in New York was just about getting personal computers. I taught myself how to program. I, you know,
What
um,
was your first computer? Do you remember what?
of course I do. You never forget your first computer, Gary. My personal computer, the one that my dad eventually bought for me, was a Commodore 64.
Yeah, that
My high
much better
school,
than the VIC 20.
much better
Less
than
than the
the VIC 20.
128.
Exactly. My school had Commodore PETs and eventually wound up getting a VAX PDP-11.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then when I moved from New York, I left New York, and my dad went to Trinidad in the Caribbean for his next assignment. My school there had an IBM System 34. So those were my early, from the PC to the mini computer. And that was how I, developed this great love of computers and programming. I taught myself how to program. We were programming machine language in those days on the Commodore 64. It's a 6510 microprocessor machine language. And then,
I'm amazed you still remember that. So what I picture with the Commodore 64 and the VIC 20 was the cassette deck, the 300 baud modem, which was like, for those who don't know, you rotary dialed into a BBS, which was a bulletin board system, and AOL had one, and you'd put the phone down after you hear that noise quickly, and then you'd pray no family member picked up the phone in another room for the next half hour or so. It was a great time. Like that was, yeah.
yeah, it was great. It was remarkable. And then, from there, Gary, quickly, as you can imagine, I fell in love with New York City at that time. But my dad left. We went to the Caribbean, and then from there we went to Hong Kong, and that's where I went to university. I went to the University of Macau while we were there, and wound up going to night school and working my way as a programmer through undergraduate, and stayed in Hong Kong after my father left. Worked there for a few more years, but always wanted to come back to the U.S. And wound up eventually coming back to go to Carnegie Mellon University for graduate school. And when I graduated from there, from Carnegie Mellon, I joined the Dun& Bradstreet Corporation. I got a job there. And that was the beginning of Cognizant. We started Cognizant inside of Dun& Bradstreet and then eventually spun it out.
Did you really? I never knew that story. So how did that was it like, "Hey, Dun& Bradstreet, we're gonna create a services arm for the rest of the company," that conversation, and it spun out from there? Or what was it like?
Well, what happened was, Gary, that I had joined this. Uh, I I got a job at Dun& Bradstreet in this management development program where they would hire MBAs into the company and they would send us around on a rotation basis to various different divisions of the company. And every now and then we were supposed to call back to the CEO's office, because this was sponsored out of the CEO's office, and give them our observations of what we were seeing around the business. And I made a call about a year in, back to the CEO's office, and I said, I've been traveling around. I've been doing assignments. I was in Boston. I've been in Frankfurt and visited Chicago and other places. And I think we're building software in all these very expensive parts of the world. We should really be building software in India. And it was just intended to be an observation. And I got a call a few days later to say, look, we think that's a great idea. There's a group of people who think it's a great idea. We want you to go to India for your next assignment and establish a business, or help establish a business inside of Dun& Bradstreet that can serve the software development needs of all of the Dun & Bradstreet companies. And so we started this thing as a captive to serve all of the sister companies of Dun & Bradstreet. And at that point, I didn't think it was going to be what it wound up being. It was just intended to be this little internal division of Dun & Bradstreet. And well, the rest
Where
is
did
history.
you start? What was your so I've been to Cognizant's headquarters in India, locations, multiple. I think there might even be a tree named after us, I think. I might have because I love that. I believe you established this concept of when people come visit, let's plant a tree, and they're and, like, it's amazing. So, like, I think we've seen so, like, where was the first office location? Where
The
was
first office, we chose to go to the city of Chennai, which is still where a significant
Yeah.
amount of Cognizant's headcount is. And we went there because in those days, this was back in the 90s. Um, the software industry in India was already well established, but a lot of it was in Bangalore and places like that, and we didn't want to go there. We
Yes.
thought it would be harder for us to compete for talent in those places, so we went to Chennai, which was still relatively um, underdeveloped from a software development standpoint, but which had a great university and educational ecosystem. And so the first office was in Chennai, and we stayed in Chennai for quite some time before we opened up in other places like Calcutta and Pune and other places.
That's awesome. Okay, and then so you that's the start of Cognizant. You spent how many years? 15, 16 years? Like, what was that journey up until you left Cognizant? Where did it start? How much revenue? What did it end? You took the company public. Like, what was that like? I'm just curious, the scaling of that business.
Yeah, look, I mean, there were a group of us that were part of that early team, founders of the business, and I was actually there, Gary, 24 years or something
Wow.
at Cognizant, and 25, something like that. I played various roles in the early days. I was the management associate that helped get the business started, worked with the team, and eventually, uh, I was part of the team that took it public. So what happened was, if I just back up, we started as a captive. Our customers were our sister companies in the early days, and then at some point we realized that we had saturated our internal market, that there wasn't a lot of growth left inside of Dun & Bradstreet. And we said to Dun & Bradstreet that, we thought we'd build something that was interesting and unique, and that we'd like to start selling our services outside of the Dun & Bradstreet group of companies. And so we started doing that. And on the back of that, we got enough momentum that we spun the company out of Dun & Bradstreet through an IPO. So we took the company public about 4 years after we founded it. As I said, I played various different roles. mostly grew up on the kind of sales side, sales and marketing and client management side. That was where I cut my teeth early on. I was looking, I was the one who was running, kind of trying to get new customers and figure out how we were going to sell to new customers and expand our existing customers. And eventually, in 2007, after a couple of my other co-founders had served as chief executives, I became the third CEO of Cognizant. And then I stayed there in that role for about 12 years as the CEO.
Wow.
And, when I left, so, we started the business, we had no revenue. And then when I left, 20 something years later, we were, the year I left, we were 16 billion of revenue and about $40 billion in market cap.
I can't imagine 16 billion of revenue, and like that's just incredible. Like and a lot of clients who are demanding, like I was, of course, and always expecting more. I think that's the common thing that you'd probably see across all customers. But the thing about Cognizant, which was different than others, was there was a sense of innovation. I remember visiting your headquarters. There was always a sense of like can do and achieving that, which I always wonder, is it back to the way your father also raised your family raised you? I'm sure you were traveling around with a sense that could do anything. Like anything's possible, especially when you combine that with technology, computers. It's an amazing place to be at that time.
Yeah, look, I think it's partly that, but no company, particularly not of that size and scale, is one person. And we had a tremendous and a terrific team of people that I think all contributed to the success here. And I think what it was, Gary, is that we figured out early on that in a services business, but really I think in any business, you want to hire the best people. We all want, like as leaders of businesses, we all want to hire absolutely the best people that we can. The trick is, once you do that, is how do you get out of their way and let them be the best versions of themselves? How do you create an environment in the company where you say, where people wake up every morning and say, this is the place where I can do my best work? And I think if you create those conditions, then that innovation that you talked about happens, because great people are going to innovate. Great people are going to think outside of the box. You just have to give them the space to do that and the conditions to make that successful. And so I viewed my job, and I think this leadership team, we viewed our job as, like, get the best team you possibly can, like do whatever you can to get the best people in the door and then get the hell out of their way. And if you do those two things, like amazing things happen.
I love it. I like that. That's a very startup mentality, which is it's about the people, it's about the talent, and like just you can in a startup you can't micromanage. There's no concept of that. In corporations you could, but like that's a very startup mentality, which I like that, Frank. That's unique. That's so when you left Cognizant and you helped create Recognize, like what do you look for in entrepreneurs then? When you're thinking about investments you're making, what are the companies that you're looking to help build and just excite? I'm just curious those qualities as well.
Yeah, look, I think we've covered. So look, at Recognize, we believe that there's an opportunity to build a new generation of services winners. So all we do at Recognize is invest in tech services businesses. Because we're focused only on this one sector of the economy, we bring a lot of operating experience in the space, obviously from our past backgrounds. And so we like to think of us when we work with companies and founders and teams at Recognize, we bring capital to help them accelerate their growth, but we also bring operating experience and operating expertise. And we think we're building the next generation of services winners. What we look for specifically are management teams that really have three things. One is they've got a vision of the future. They want to innovate. They want to like change the paradigm here. The services industry is changing like every other industry. And so we look for people who've got a clear vision of what that future looks like in their space and how they're innovating there. We want a clear strategy on how to tap that innovation and how to sort of make that real. But then importantly, you want teams that really know how to execute. And so all those things have to come together. You've got to have a clear vision, you've got to have a good strategy, and then you've got to be able to execute. and teams that can pull all that together. Um, Now that's a little bit of motherhood and apple pie, because who doesn't want that? And so we look for teams that really, have a lot of those characteristics, and then we look to say, can we, as recognized, help supplement them in perhaps in places where the team needs to be rounded out, in places where they don't have the experience, where they're facing growth that they haven't seen before, and so on and so forth. And that's the value that we bring to the table.
I'm curious with the Gen AI conversations on BPO and BPI, like what's happening there? How does it are the companies you're helping looking into that as an accelerator, as a threat? Like, how do you think through the Gen AI conversation in terms of delivery?
Yeah, look, Gary, look, I think it's both, is the bottom line. I think there are parts of the services ecosystem that Gen AI will automate, will make more efficient, you know, will reduce potentially jobs in some areas. But equally, it creates tremendous opportunity to do new things. And if you frame it that way, Gary, it's no different um, than other productivity and technological innovations that we've seen in the past. Now, look, I don't want to trivialize Gen AI. I happen to think that Gen AI and what we're seeing in AI is one of the most profound things that we've seen in our technological lifetimes. So I don't mean to trivialize it, but in terms of how services businesses need to think about it, it's both a risk and an opportunity, and we've seen that playbook before.
I like it. I like it. Now, okay, so outside of outside of your past and delivery, you've helped introduce me to organizations like New York Science and New York Economic Club, and like you brought me like it's amazing to see what what is the thing that you are excited most about? I'm curious, outside of all that. What's the thing that keeps you passionate and moving? Because everyone has something which is like inspirational, and that's where I get my drive from, or that's where I get the excitement from, and, like, I know you do a lot. There is a lot more than anyone else I know. So I'm just curious what that is.
For us, for me and my wife, the thing we can try to spend our time on outside of our professional pursuits is on education around the world. We think that the biggest catalyst for change in the world is education in large parts of the world, the developing world, if I can call it that. Education is still not available universally, and so we spend time thinking about that and how we can make that happen. Back to AI, I think in a lot of the world, AI is going to create disruption in some cases, and so retraining of people is going to be really important. And so, we, as you mentioned briefly, Gary, I'm on the board of Carnegie Mellon. I spend a lot of time with Carnegie Mellon, and the Carnegie Mellon arguably is right now the epicenter of artificial intelligence and
Yeah.
research and robotics and cybersecurity. Some of the very earliest work in AI, the field of AI, was born in a few places, and Carnegie Mellon was one of them. And so there's just a very, very rich tradition of artificial intelligence there. My wife is involved in a really interesting educational organization called United World College that was started in the 1960s originally by an
Wow.
educator and a philanthropist who said, if we're going to avoid having a world war, a third world war, this was the height of the Cold War. The formula that they came up with was to get kids from all over the world across all socioeconomic backgrounds, put them in a high school setting in a remote part of the world where they're forced to live in a boarding school setting, so that they're forced to live together and play together and study together, and through that realize that people around the world are more similar than we are different. And so there are now 18 of these schools around the world. And My wife went to the school when she was a teenager. My two kids have been to the school. My daughter just graduated. And we love the school, and we spend a lot of time, or my wife more than me spends a lot of time furthering the mission of the school. And we're trying to build the 19th school if we can. So education is really our passion outside of our
That's
professional.
amazing. I haven't heard of that's and it's a great concept is, diversity. It's diversity at a whole new level. People say diversity, but it's not taken seriously. That's got a mission behind it at least, which is it still it was created during that time, 1960s and Cold War, and is it still have that same base in the mission, which is let's build a better future, like, and not allow the war to occur? And like, is that still
It's
inherent?
absolutely still the mission. It's
Wow.
absolutely still the mission. The mission continues to be very strong. It's, as I said, the original school was in Wales, and started in, I think it was actually in 1960, about 60 years ago or so. And now there are 18 schools around the world. And if you just think about it, Gary, um, the the kids go to these schools. 80% of them, or some number like that, eventually wind up back in their home countries. And those students, the alumni, form national committees in the countries. And the national committees are responsible for recruiting the next generation of kids to go to the schools. So there are national committees in, I think, 160 countries around the world. So kids come
Wow.
from virtually all all over the world, and they genuinely look for kids across all socioeconomic backgrounds. The school tries very hard to be needs blind. So if you get into the school, um, they will find a way to support you financially. If you can't afford it to go, you'll get a scholarship. My wife, as an example, grew up in Brazil until she was 16. When she was 16 years old, she applied and she got into the school, and she got a scholarship to go to Swaziland. And so she spent, well, now Eswatini. And so she spent 2 years of her last 2 years of high school in what was then Swaziland, now Eswatini, and with kids from all over the world. And these people that she met all those years ago continue to be some of her best friends, and the community they built. And as you said, it built this incredible diversity right into the school. So we love the place.
It's I know we said we're not talking politics, but it sounds like it should be the feeder for a lot of politicians, is like you have to come from that series to understand all cultures and backgrounds. Like that would be across the world. Very fascinated, and I've gotten to meet your wife before, who in medical field, physician. Like I'm trying, like I think is that what the degree took her to, is helping others in medicine, or
Yeah, she did her an MD, so she's a doctor, a
yeah.
physician, but then did her PhD in genetics. So she's still practicing doctor, but does spends a lot of her time doing research in genetics.
That's amazing. That's okay. So that's the passion. What books would you recommend for our listeners? What's your favorite book for? Let's do two. One would be more like educational business. Here's what you recommend. The other one could be more like just something fun. And I'm assuming you have your dad's love of reading, or did you like? So my dad could read the dictionary or encyclopedias at night and love every minute of it. Would not put it to me. I'm very good on Audible. I could listen to audiobooks very fast, and actually I'll do it on riding my cycle bike around and just going, or like, but what's your story there?
Yeah, I would say first of all that uh, I like to read, but I'm not sure that I'm anywhere close to my dad's incredible um, ability to absorb um, material, reading material. I think for me, Gary, two books that I would say, my all-time favorite business book, maybe always, is Good to Great, Jim Collins. Like that. If you haven't read that, but if you haven't read Good to Great, if any business leader out there hasn't read Good to Great, I think it's a must read for anybody in business. Just kind of one of those classics, been around for a
Good to
long
great,
time.
awesome.
Yeah, but still very relevant. Um, and you asked for something that's a little bit more fun, but I'll go to I'll stay with business, because somebody just recently recommended a book to me that I'm not all the way through yet, but it's so fascinating that I really already recommend it. It's called The Good Ancestor. The Good Ancestor, and it's a radical prescription for long-term thinking. The idea is, how do you do things today that generations from now people will look back and say, because of the decisions that Frank or Gary made today, my life is better today, or something has happened today And my ancestor Frank or my ancestor Gary did that. Like, how do you be a good ancestor? It's a really interesting way to think about the world. Doing things that,
That's wow.
yeah,
That's
it's
interesting. So I just finished Hidden Potential, Adam Grant. I like behavioral books. To me, that's like how crazy. And so I think what he was saying, one part of it was a lot of people live to kind of like they want their parents to be proud. They want their parents to like he's like, we should all be living to make our kids proud. Our kids, like the kids of the future, the kids should see you as the role model and your everything we do as parents should be to inspire them. Don't care about your parents as much as they saying it's like don't think what they think of you because they'll respect what if their kids love you, they'll love you. Like, don't it's interesting to see that that's a step in one generation, I guess, as an ancestor. But wow, do you have with yours? I guess with what you and your passion, the passion of education. I'm assuming is setting something up there for you. That's what I'm going to assume is like there's something there, which is that would be where people look back, 100 years from now and say, wow, Frank and your wife, you established that, and like that's
yeah. Look, I mean, we all do what we can, right? And it can be, the impact is what I've learned is that if you can have big impact, that's great. But you can have big impact in one person's life, and that's just as important, right? Every bit counts. And so, like, I think about when every day when I go to a board meeting up in Pittsburgh at Carnegie Mellon, I think about Andrew Carnegie and William Larimer Mellon, who created the two institutions that eventually came together and to become Carnegie Mellon. And you think about, I mean, what that one institution has done for generations and generations of students, of researchers, of the field of artificial intelligence. I mean, this is such a remarkable impact that I'm certain Andrew Carnegie or William Larimer Mellon would never have imagined or couldn't have imagined what this would have done. And so you think back to that and say, if we could all do that in our own ways, and many of us don't have the ability to have the impact that perhaps Andrew Carnegie had so many. It wasn't just Carnegie Mellon University, there's Carnegie Hall, the Carnegie Libraries, the Carnegie Philanthropies. He was able, had the means to leave behind a lot. But I think if you just do it within something that is even within your family or one person or whatever it is, your company, your institution, your organization, and think about how generations from now they will be better because of the decisions that you made today. I think it creates an interesting way of approaching your life.
I love it. I agree. I couldn't agree more. And just I think that's amazing. And with that, Frank, like again, I want to thank you for joining us here on Unqork'd Unscripted. I know the audience loves hearing from you. You have, I when I looked at Frank's LinkedIn before this session, it's like 400,000 or so followers, which is insane of the amount of followers you have. And just thank you for taking the time to spend with us here and thanks for being an amazing friend and helping advice wherever you possibly can. Frank. If I email Frank in a minute, he'll be like, "Okay, what do we need? What do you need? Like, let's just talk." And I love that openness. So thank you. You've helped me a lot, is what I would say. So definitely for sure. And thanks everyone for joining. And again, Frank, thank you for being with us today.
Gary, thanks so much for
Awesome.
having me. It's terrific to be here. Good to see you.
Awesome. Till next time, everyone. Thank you. Cheers.